regiments on the main line begin to withdraw. The 50th Ohio, which is the unit closest to the pike on this side of it, falls back almost immediately. The 100th Ohio, which is the closest regiment on the other side of the road, immediately begins to fall back. Half of the 104th Ohio, which is next to the 100th Ohio, begins to fall back. Now the Confederates are pushing up past the cotton gin. On this side, the 72nd Illinois, which spans that section I pointed out in the garden, that's about where the right flank of the 72nd is. The left side of the unit begins to crumble. And now the Confederates are pushing up to about where those buildings are beyond these two, where the White House is. And the 72nd is finding itself flanked, so the other part of it begins to withdraw. 200 yards wide is the hole. That's what Moscow Carter said the size of it was. That's a huge hole. And Southerners are pouring up through the breach. And there is this moment where the battle hangs in the balance and they've actually got a chance. They actually have a chance to pull this off. Because remember this, there are 50 men standing right there. There's nobody in front of that building, there's nobody between them, there's nobody in front of that building, and you got 4 pieces of artillery. That's it. And this in and of itself is a pretty big area. Those 50 guys, they run. They see the guys in front of them, these are the recruits, they don't have any support, they start running the other way. But the battle starts developing into several different phases. As this push through is beginning and the Southerners are coming up into the yard, on the east side of the road, the 2 Kentucky regiments and the 175th Ohio all of a sudden just charge forward. The Kentuckians didn't need to be told. They saw a threat, they threw themselves right into it. And they just light into the Confederates. A man from Illinois said he actually watched as one man nearly severed a rebel officer's head with his musket, which presumably means he swung it so hard he nearly knocked the guy's head off. He said he watched as another guy impaled a Southerner up against the breastworks with a pick. That's one phase of the battle. Patrick Cleburne, arguably the best division commander in the Southern Army. He's probably dead by the time the sun went down at 4:35. Took one bullet right in the chest, falls down there. General Granberry is shot down, and so the command structure is beginning to be splintered. There's a breakthrough, but there's nobody there to urge the men forward, to keep pushing. And this countercharge begins. First of all, what it does is it stops them dead in their tracks. Then they begin to shove them back, slowly. But there's still great penetration on this side. So that's sort of phase 1. Now you have phase 2. Well, or you could say what's happening over here is phase 2. But the fact is there are 2 separate issues occurring here. Remember, there's nobody in place from the pike to the battery. And the battery is suddenly overrun, and now the Confederates have got control of those 4 guns. They've also overrun 4 guns on the other side, but they're recaptured. So there's a huge threat in this area. But remember earlier when I told you, who's to the right of the battery? The 44th Missouri, these recruits. Although 50 of them from here had run, the rest of the regiment holds steady, and what they do is they become an anchor. Because they don't flee to the rear, and guys from the main line are actually able to rally on this line, they've got that area plugged up. So that's a phase, and they're battling with the Southerners in the garden, but they're holding them in check. The Confederates have taken the main line, but they can't break through the secondary line. The 44th Missouri is just throwing sheets of fire down into the Confederates. One of the best things they had going for them. Although they were recruits, many of their officers were not. Colonel Robert Bradshaw commanded the regiment. He had served in the 25th Missouri earlier in the war. Do you know what his first battle was? Shiloh. He was part of Everett Peabody's brigade that had first detected the Confederate advance. So Bradshaw knew what combat was, and he is exhorting his men to hold their position at all costs. They take catastrophic loss. They would lose almost 1/3 of their regiment holding this ground, preventing the breach from being exploited further west. What their stand does, and this is all happening in a matter of just a few minutes, what they do is allow the 111th Ohio, which is a regiment on the main line, they've watched the 50th Ohio and the 72nd Illinois completely implode. So the left flank of the 111th is open. The commanding officer is given enough time, because the 44th is behind him, throwing a covering fire over the top, that he's able to refuse his flank. and he turns 2 or 3 companies on the left side and connects with the secondary line, and they begin throwing sheets of fire into the garden. And here's the next phase. Updike. Updike's men are 200 yards behind the house. And the first thing that he recognizes is this explosion. And then they start to see men running that way, except they're wearing blue uniforms. Updike's men are all veterans, and they don't need to be told what to do. And they drop their cooking utensils and their coffee mugs and grab their rifles, about-faced, and charged right up into the yard. He has 7 regiments. 4 of them slam right into this area. The other 3 are on that side of the road helping reinforce the Ohio recruits and the Kentucky veterans, and shoving the Confederates back to retake the line. His other 4 regiments come charging into the yard. 125th Ohio, 73rd Illinois, 36th Illinois, 24th Wisconsin. The 24th Wisconsin is commanded by a 19-year-old officer named Arthur MacArthur, who would have a great legacy. His son, Douglas MacArthur, was born almost 2 decades after this battle. And Arthur nearly died. He was shot 3 times. Somewhere in this proximity, he got into a hand-to-hand brawl with a rebel officer who nearly killed him. MacArthur killed him, but he nearly died before his men dragged him away. But what they do, as several men said, it was like 2 ocean waves crashing together. You have this flood of men in gray and butternut, and all of a sudden, right where that ridge is, and you can't see the low ground, all of a sudden, here come 600-700 of Updike's men, running as fast as they can, and they just clash right here in the yard. The fighting, I could tell you, and I could give you detail after detail, but it is just absolutely savage.